New tariffs on Turkey. The president is taking strong steps on the country where an American pastor is under house arrest. Charlottesville 1 year later. How the city is preparing for the anniversary of last year's fatal alt-right rally, and what the diocese bishop is saying. Focus on young people. As the Vatican prepares for a meeting with bishops in October, young Italians prepare. And a major milestone. Meet the nun celebrating 75 years since her first profession. On EWTN News Nightly for Friday, August 10th, 2018. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you for joining us for News from a Catholic Perspective. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. Our top story tonight, a financial shockwave is ripping through Turkey tonight with its currency plunging dramatically. It comes amid a dispute over an American pastor on trial in the country and promises by President Trump to double tariffs on the NATO ally. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi joins us with more. Jason?
Good evening, Wyatt. Senator Lindsey says he hates it had to come to tariffs, but he says the president had no other choice. Turkey moved Pastor Andrew Brunson from prison to house arrest July 25th, but the American still faces up to 35 years in jail, charged with terrorism, spying, and what the indictment calls Christianization.
Pastor Andrew Brunson deserves to be free.
The administration takes aim at Turkey. The president tweeting today, "I have just authorized a doubling of tariffs on steel and aluminum with respect to Turkey as their currency, the Turkish lira, slides rapidly downward against our very strong dollar. Aluminum will now be 20% and steel 50%. Our relations with Turkey are not good at this time." He's following through on threats like this one in July. The United States will impose large sanctions on Turkey for their long-time detainment of Pastor Andrew Brunson, a great Christian, family man, and wonderful human being.
The president is very intent on getting Pastor Brunson out of jail, home. He's now under house arrest. I was in Turkey about 3 weeks ago talking to President Erdogan about how we need to get this issue behind us. We need Turkey as an ally.
Earlier this week, top American and Turkish diplomats met and talked about the North Carolina native.
Can you tell us if you made any progress about the situation of Pastor Brunson?
Yeah, I would say we would define progress as Pastor Brunson being brought home. I think so. No. Progress is Pastor Brunson being brought home to the United States.
Senator James Lankford urged the administration to punish Turkey, as he told me before this August recess.
I think sanctions are entirely appropriate. I think limiting our interchange between Turkey and the United States is entirely appropriate. So Turkey has basically said, what are we going to get for Pastor Brunson? I think the correct response should be, what you're going to get is sanctions.
Because of Brunson, the U.S. last week placed sanctions on Turkey's interior and justice ministers. Now, Turkey fired back, saying it will freeze the assets of their American counterparts. The country's currency tumbled 14% today. Investors are worried about U.S. tariffs and Turkey's economic policies. Wyatt?
Sounds like this conflict is far from over. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi reporting. Thanks, Jason. Vice President Mike Pence is expressing U.S. support for the Catholic Church's efforts to keep the peace in Nicaragua. Pence spoke today with Cardinal Pietro Parolin, the Vatican Secretary of State, to condemn the violence. Hundreds of Nicaraguans have died in protests against the government, and Catholic leaders have often been the target. The Vice President applauds the Church for supporting human rights, democracy, and freedom in the Central American country. He and Cardinal Parolin met at the White House in November of 2017. Tennessee carries out its first execution in nearly a decade, despite a plea for clemency from the state's Catholic bishops. 59-year-old inmate Billy Ray Irick was convicted of the 1985 rape and murder of a 7-year-old girl. Before dying, he said, "I just want to say I'm really sorry." The death penalty opponents gathered in churches around the state to pray. It comes a week after Pope Francis revised the catechism, which now calls the death penalty inadmissible. The city of Charlottesville, Virginia, is preparing for a grim anniversary. Sunday marks 1 year since the fatal Unite the Right rally. Officials say they'll be taking extra precautions this weekend. Plenty of police on the streets of Charlottesville, and a state of emergency is already declared.
What you can expect to see and what you can expect to engage is a very significant law enforcement presence in our community, and that presence is here as a support to our citizens.
All this for the anniversary of the Unite the Right rally, which falls on Sunday. Tensions rose at the 2017 event.
Off our streets, Nazi scum! Off our streets, Nazi scum!
At one point, a car plowed into pedestrians who were protesting the white supremacists. 32-year-old Heather Heyer was run over and killed. A suspected neo-Nazi sympathizer was charged.
Here is where my daughter was ripped away from me.
2 Virginia State Patrol troopers were also killed in a helicopter crash as they were trying to bring calm to the area. Starting tonight, a secure perimeter will be established in downtown Charlottesville. That includes street closures and parking restrictions. Officials say they are monitoring various bits of intelligence regarding the city and ask the public to point out any possible problems.
I would urge the citizens of Charlottesville and anybody else who is going to be visiting here is to continue to be vigilant. You can help deter some of these acts that might take place.
Charlottesville officials turned down numerous permit requests for this weekend, including one for Unite the Right To. The group will have a rally Sunday afternoon in Lafayette Park here in Washington, D.C. Charlottesville is in the Diocese of Richmond, and the bishop there is reflecting on this weekend's anniversary. In a statement, Bishop Barry Nestout says, in part, "It is my sincere hope that all remain safe in these coming days and throughout the weekend, and may the Holy Spirit be a source of strength and comfort for the families and friends who continue to mourn the loss of a loved one." Joining me now to discuss today's news is Kelly Jane Torrance, Deputy Managing Director for the Weekly Standard. Kelly Jane, welcome back to the program.
Great to be here.
Based on all your research, your publications, reporting, do you think the country's really begun to heal after this, or are we still as divided as ever?
You know, I think it's mixed, Wyatt. I think in some ways we have, but keep in mind it's not just a year later. These are issues, the issues that were brought up in Charlottesville were really issues that have existed since before this country was founded. So that's, you know, a couple centuries of very difficult tensions and race issues. So those are not going to be, you know, solved overnight. And I have to say, you know, I'm a little worried about this weekend in D.C. As you noted, one of the organizers of the Charlottesville rally has gotten a permit and will have an event here in D.C. And of course, so some people are going to be counter-protesting. And in fact, Black Lives Matters is planning to burn a Confederate flag. And, you know, I worry, not to make
all this may be right in front of the White House.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, you know, not to make a pun, but I do worry that could further inflame the situation because you're going to have some people very angry about that sort of symbolism. And so, you know, I hope the country can sort of make it through this weekend and really maybe be a little more thoughtful and reflect a bit. And, you know, those of us at home not in part of the passionate thing, you know, think about what's going on and why someone had to give her life. I mean, we all hope that Heather Heyer didn't die in vain.
Sure. Well, I know a lot of people are hoping for that, and I know a lot of our viewers will be praying for this weekend. We reported earlier on the situation in Turkey and President Trump doubling the tariffs there. Do you think he's doing the right thing?
You know, I do. I'm not a fan of tariffs in general, but you know, he had to do something, and I think this was it. You know, the Turkish lira had already been spiraling, of course, and that is actually because of Pastor Brunson. This, you know, people have been worried. What is America going to do because they haven't been able to come to a deal? In fact, they thought they had a deal, and Israel actually released a Turkish woman who was accused of aiding and funding Hamas, and Turkey was supposed to let Pastor Brunson go. They did not. And so Turkey is, I think, sending some messages to America. Last night, in fact, Erdogan met with the chief of staff to Iran's president, Hassan Rouhani, and declared that they're going to do everything they can to stand with Iran against the U.S. sanctions. So I think Turkey's sending a message. And I think Donald Trump needed to send one back, and this is just the beginning, I think.
Yeah, very troubling for the U.S. and its allies. The Trump administration weighed in on another international crisis, Nicaragua, today defending the Catholic Church there. President Trump has received a lot of criticism about his handling of international affairs in general. How do you think that the Trump administration is doing in general on global affairs?
You know, that's an excellent question, Wyatt. I think it's a bit mixed, personally. I think in some ways it's good. I'm glad we got out of the Iran deal, for example, because you had, basically that regime is a murderous, torturous regime. You have people on the streets actually, as we speak. I follow Iran a lot, and there's a footage, you know, people chanting death to the dictator. They want a new government. And none of that money that they would get from dealing economically with other countries is going to the people. There's people who haven't eaten meat in over a year. And so I think he did a very good thing there. And I think supporting sending words of support to the freedom fighters of places like Iran is great. I'd like to see him maybe express more support for the freedom fighters of Nicaragua, of Venezuela, others. And maybe going on beyond moral support would be good. But I do think it's a good first step to say, hey, we're not going to be dealing with regimes that torture and murder their own people. And if you do, we're not going to do business with you. And who can argue with that? People do, but I don't see how.
Yeah, very good points. Kelly Jane Torrance, Deputy Managing Editor for the Weekly Standard. Thanks so much for your analysis.
Thanks for having us. All right.
U.S.-backed forces in Afghanistan push back on the Taliban. This after the terror group tried to overtake a city in the eastern part of the country. At least 14 Afghan policemen were killed and 20 were wounded in the assault on the capital of the Ghazni province. More than 100 others were also killed, mostly Taliban fighters. The city was on lockdown and fighting continued throughout the day. Dozens of civilians, including children, die in Yemen after airstrikes led by Saudi Arabia. Officials say a school bus and busy market were hit yesterday. The international community is condemning the attack, and the UN is calling for an investigation. Rebels in Yemen and a Saudi-led coalition have been fighting since March of 2015. Villagers on the Indonesian island of Lombok gathered to pray outside a mosque destroyed in Sunday's earthquake. They hope houses of worship can be rebuilt soon. The island has been hit by over 300 aftershocks since the initial quake, which killed hundreds of people and displaced 270,000 more. In less than 2 months, the Vatican will host many of the world's bishops to focus on young people. The meeting, known as a synod, will take place in the Vatican in October. In preparation, young Italian Catholics are participating in a pilgrimage. They're walking to Rome from across the country to meet Pope Francis this weekend. Alan Holdren is the EWTN Rome Bureau Chief. Alan, some of these young people have walked for days. What is the schedule this weekend?
Well, Wyatt, these youth are coming from all over Italy for an event sponsored by the Italian bishops. The idea is to bring them together ahead of October's synod, which has the theme of young people and discerning their vocations. 40,000 people are walking to Rome for this weekend's events. Told that the pilgrims come from each of 195 different dioceses from all over this nation. They're going to be walking also through the night tonight in an event called the White Night. When they get here to Rome, churches will be open for prayer and confession. They expect 70,000 people to be here for the weekend's events, highlights of which include a prayer vigil with the Pope in Circus Maximus, an open field in the middle of Rome here, and then also Mass in St. Peter's Square with the Pope on Sunday.
Okay, and we understand some of the young people will get a chance to talk to the Holy Father this weekend.
That's right. There will be 3 young people who will pose questions to the Holy Father at that vigil at Circus Maximus. We expect them to speak about vocation, also young people in today's world, meaning of life today. Looking ahead to the Synod, much attention has been focused on some controversial topics like sexuality and gender that the bishops will discuss during those October meetings. In the document outlining the agenda for the Synod activities, the Vatican used the phrase LGBT for what's believed to be the first time officially in a document, and that caused a lot of controversy in Catholic circles. That document is now online in English on the Synod of Bishops website. Wyatt?
Okay, so remind us, for those of people who are not familiar with a synod, what exactly is a synod? What is the purpose of a synod?
Wyatt, it's a way for the Pope to examine a specific topic or also look at the Church's presence in a specific geographical area. Normally it takes place every 3 years. The Pope chooses a theme and then he gathers information through surveys. In this case, he reached out to young people directly to fill out those surveys online. A document is then drafted to guide the weeks of discussion between bishops, experts, and the Pope himself. And after a synod, the Pope usually writes what's called an apostolic exhortation. It's a reflection on the results of the discussion. The last document published was Amoris Laetitia 2 years ago, The Joy of Love, that came on the heels of the Synod on the Family 3 years ago. And it has been a little bit controversial. It's been much debated because of what it said about communion for the divorced and remarried Catholics.
Okay, so like you say, the bishops will be there. What about young people? Will they actually be present at the synod?
Yes, Wyatt, young people will be participating. They've been involved in every phase of the lead up to the Synod and will also be here for the Synod from all over the world. While they'll be a part of the discussions with the bishops, they won't actually be able to contribute directly to the composition of the final document, which is in the bishop's hands.
Okay, like you say, Alan, we'll be covering this and watching all the results. Alan Holdren, EWTN Rome Bureau Chief. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Wyatt.
Coming up.
Despite the
we'll talk to a professor who says the polls on Roe versus Wade are misleading. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. Our next guest says polls are overstating the public's approval of Roe versus Wade, the landmark Supreme Court decision that recognized the constitutional right to an abortion. In National Review, Michael New writes, quote, "Since 1973, supporters of legal abortion have tried to convince the Supreme Court that Roe v. Wade enjoys very broad public support. However, a closer look at the survey data indicates that this is not the case." Michael New is a visiting assistant professor at Catholic University of America's Bush School of Business. He's also an associate scholar at the pro-life Charlotte Lozier Institute. Michael, welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me.
You say these polls are misleading. How so?
They're misleading in several ways. First off, in 2013, Pew Research did a survey, and they found that many people weren't familiar with the Roe v. Wade decision. 20% hadn't heard of it, and 17% thought it dealt with an issue other than abortion. So a lot of people aren't even familiar with the decision itself. And even among the 60% who know it's an abortion decision, probably don't really understand the full implications of the decision. Roe v. Wade went beyond legalizing abortion in the first trimester. It effectively legalized abortion on demand and made it very difficult to regulate or limit even second or third trimester abortions. Also, people don't really understand the implications of a reversal or an overturn of Roe v. Wade. An overturn or reversal wouldn't ban abortion. It would simply return abortion policy to the states, and state legislatures would kind of arrive at their own conclusions. So there's several dimensions of the decision that people don't understand, and the polling data does not really reflect that.
Why do you think the data misleads the public on the issue? Is it intentional in your view?
I think to a certain extent it is. I think a lot of these media outlets tend to be sympathetic toward legal abortion. I think they also realize the Supreme Court at some level is sensitive to public opinion on abortion, and I think they kind of want to see to it that Roe v. Wade's kind of a quote-unquote super precedent, and that there would be, and they want to make the case there would be kind of a backlash if it were overturned. But again, I think that people don't really understand the decision, they don't really understand the implications of a reversal, and I think the support for the decision is greatly overstated.
What do you think pro-life advocates can do to make sure their views are better heard and the picture is more balanced like it is realistically?
I think one thing we can certainly do is do our own polling. I think that a lot of the polling questions that are asked aren't always helpful to pro-lifers. There's very good data indicating that people are very sympathetic toward limitations on second and third trimester abortions, and we need to get that out. And also, even looking at a broader question about who decides abortion policy, there's support for the pro-life position. Susan B. Anthony List recently conducted polls in several swing states asking, should the Supreme Court kind of dictate abortion policy, or should it be decided by state legislatures? And majorities of people in nearly every swing state preferred that policy be made by their own state legislatures and not the Supreme Court. So I think by doing our own polling, I think we can kind of counteract this narrative.
What impact is the nomination of Judge Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court having on this discussion? A lot of pro-life people are pretty excited about that nomination.
I think that he'll certainly, his nomination, and if he's confirmed, would certainly help the pro-life movement. It's hard to say specifically what would happen. I mean, we don't know what kind of cases might be appealed to the Supreme Court. We don't know what kind of cases the Supreme Court might choose to hear. A relatively small percentage of appealed cases are even heard. So we really don't know what the future of abortion jurisprudence, contains. But I think it is fair to say he'd be someone who'd be fairly sympathetic toward additional protections for the unborn. And I think he'd make it easier for people in the state level to do more to protect unborn children. And I think that's why pro-lifers are excited about this nomination.
A lot of reasons for pro-lifers to be excited when thinking about the future. Michael New, visiting assistant professor of business at the Catholic University of America, thanks so much for talking with us.
Thanks for having me.
Up next, we'll get an update on Iraq's Christians and the efforts to rebuild their towns. Plus, 75 years of Sister Emma. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. An advocate for Iraqi Christians says the country needs more than just financial support as it rebuilds. Speaking at the Hudson Institute this month, Loai Mikhael says Iraq needs jobs. He says aid and food are not enough. It will take many resources to restore the dignity of religious minorities who have been victims of genocide at the hands of ISIS. Loai Mikhael, senior advisor for the Iraq Haven Project, joins us now. Loai, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Iraq has suffered economic devastation at the hands of ISIS the last 4 years. How can Iraq create jobs which will bring back the Christians?
I mean, the problem is here, like, to deal with one mass Iraq, it's very difficult sort of. So what we're trying here in Iraq Haven, we try to bring private sectors to Iraq, to restore jobs, to create special economic zones, secure special economic zones for people down there, and to secure certain areas to bring the companies, investors down there, and to create jobs. So this is very important to create that, because right now some families, they go back there, but they are suffering because there's no jobs, there's no opportunities to restore their dignities, to start again, to build their families. So that's what we are focusing in, to bring international community, to bring investors, to bring everybody who wants to create jobs in the area for the minorities, whoever they are, Christians, Yazidis, Muslims, who are suffered the ISIS genocide in the area.
The aid promised by the Trump administration and Vice President Pence personally has been slow to arrive. Can you update us at all as what's been going on?
That's right. The aid, some promises been made by the administration, which we are thankfully for them, but there's still that the aid has been very slow. And what we want to see is not only providing aid. We want to see building infrastructure. We want to see building the areas that have been destroyed, create jobs. So the aid is not that large scale. It's only given to some NGOs who can provide some aid and medicine and things like that. Which is great. I'm not saying it's not good, but still we want to see something that can change the reality on the ground. You have thousands of families displaced, and a lot of promises has been made, but those promises has not been delivered yet. So we are waiting from the USAID or State Department, others, to do something about quickly, to find the right partners on the ground from the NGOs, to give them aid, to give them some money, how can they build and build the infrastructure and restore the families again.
And in the meantime, I can only imagine how devastating this is as Christians to come back to your home and to find everything destroyed. What is life like there for Christians who are trying to rebuild?
Yeah, the life is very devastated, and there's also frustration for the families to go back down there because there's a security challenge down there, which is areas being divided between north and south, and who's going to secure or not. So the families who goes there, they don't trust most of the securities down on the ground, and also they see there is no hope for them to come because their life was taken from them, and this is the problem. So we need to bring the trust to the families again, that okay, when you go back, nothing will happen again, and there will be security for you if you go back, and there will be job for you created if you go back, and also you can send your sons and daughters to schools. The sort of education, it's very important, because families, a lot of children has lost the school for many years because of the conflict and fight with ISIS on the ground. So it's been tremendous challenges for the family, and the problem we see, the people still want to flee again from Iraq. They're immigrating. We want that to be stopped, and we want those families to go back to restore their dignities and to have better security and to be able to secure themselves by themselves under the ISF, Iraqi security forces, or coalition auspices with Peshmerga and others.
But security, like I said, remains such an important priority.
Absolutely, yes.
So many challenges here, but it's important to note that there are people like you and other advocates around the world who are standing up for these Christians. Loya Mikhail, Senior Advisor for the Iraq Haven Project, thanks so much for talking with us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Finally tonight, a major milestone for Sister Emma of the Immaculate Heart of Mary. She's celebrating 75 years as a religious sister. Sister Emma was born in Mexico in 1921. She made her first confession 75 years ago and made final vows 6 years later. She now lives in the congregation's community in Guadalajara and is 97 years old. Sister says we should always continue working to give glory to God, and may God bless her and her congregation. And that concludes our newscast for tonight and for this week. We thank you for watching. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Wyatt Goolsby. We're back on Monday with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night, and God bless.